let's get started. Welcome to the 2022 May and September CFE. This is a session specifically set up to discuss and to kind of begin the CFE preparations officially for 2022 as part of the PrepFormula program. And I am very excited to have all of you here. For those of you that don't know who I am, I'm Mike Katzeman. I'm the course director at PrepFormula. Prior to doing this sort of consulting work, for lack of a better way of explaining this, I was involved with the CPA Canada National Marketing Setter, and I was specifically involved with the 5-hour case. So I'm not an expert, but because I don't believe in anyone who calls themselves an expert at, in anything really, but I happen to specialize specifically in the 5-hour cases. And that's kind of the area that I really enjoy because there's a lot of puzzle pieces, and it's usually the area where people struggle the most because depth is very confusing. So I'm going to try to explain what depth is. And I'll explain kind of before, anyway. A few other things that you might or may not know about me personally. And, you'll be listening to me for about an hour, so it's nice to maybe understand who I am. So I, before working for, and I've been involved with the educational world for approximately now 9 or 10 years. Prior to this point, I was a case marker and, I guess heavily involved with the York University's Atkinson program, specifically for an advanced audit course, which taught case writing as well. And then prior to that point, I was part of EY, which is my old firm. What many of you don't really know is PrepFormula, and what is like PrepFormula? Why are you here? I would say PrepFormula is very much a hobby business. I wouldn't describe this as a real official, for-profit thing that you all learn about and do quants about. We're a collective of people who have 9-to-5 jobs, including myself. In my personal life, I am a CPA and I manage a software company called LearnFormula, and I'm the CEO and have been for about 5 years. So this is very much kind of a passion project, and most people here that are involved within the PrepFormula program are involved because they're curious about helping other students, and they kind of do it more, at least in my case, I'm more interested in understanding the puzzle pieces and helping a student or a new entrant to, I guess, the CPA profession and designation, because I am a very big proponent of the CPA designation and think that it opens a lot of wonderful doors for people. So anyway, let's get started. A little bit more about the PrepFormula program. So we're, again, a group, like a collective of CPA markers who do consulting work one-on-one and also run a lot of these type of like live classes, and sometimes they're, recorded as well. But the idea is that, we kind of collectively pool our resources to teach you things that you don't really necessarily hear as part of the CPA journey. And we try to explain it in a way that, we're, I guess, hoping that the CPA body would explain with very clear examples on how to write. So one of the challenges that I often find is a lot of candidates who are approaching these exams don't quite really understand like what the specific verbiage relates to. Like if I was to ask you, what is depth? Okay. A lot of you might look at this and say, well, I kind of know what depth is. It's hitting a specific number of points within the marking guide. Is that depth? And the answer is, it depends. It depends. Well, if it depends, then it shouldn't really, first of all, it shouldn't depend, period. Okay. It has to be more black and white, but unfortunately we live in a world of gray, and there's a lot of, basically possibilities for the marking guide to change based on actual student performance. For example, if the average candidate does extremely well in one of the AOs, then all of a sudden that marking guide will change. Or if the average candidate does extremely poorly, then the marking guide will change again. So the definition of depth is kind of the sliding scale that could move up or down depending on what that might be. So all of a sudden, hey, wait a second, you thought that depth was extremely, precise. It had to be, very, very black and white. And in my opinion, in what I've seen so far, it's not really. And that's what makes this process kind of confusing. So again, that's why you're all here. PrepFormula has been the largest and most trusted CPA prep program since approximately 2015, with about 50,000 site visits a month. So thank you so much for all of that to all of you. And as I mentioned, our two sweet spots are teaching these type of very hands-on classes, which are kind of like what you're watching right now, and also doing a lot of one-on-one assistance, manually going through a case with a student, understanding what's wrong, and being able to kind of provide real-life examples on how to fix the issues. Okay. So a quick disclaimer here, mostly because a lot of what I talk about is sort of outside the CPA curriculum, and it is not something that you can hear and or understand directly by reading CPA literature. So a lot of this stuff is sort of my own personal opinion based on what I've seen. Okay. So let me explain what we're doing here. So basically you're going to have two sessions, one by me and then another one on Tuesday. And I'll talk more about that soon. But basically this is the first session, and then there's going to be a second session, later on. Okay. Well, what are we going to do today? So we're going to look and most importantly discuss, the CFE results in detail. Then we're going to break down day 1 versus day 2 versus day 3, etc. We're going to talk about some like logistics. We're going to talk about debriefing. We're going to talk about some top mistakes that we see, a study plan, and then of course a Q&A with some other stuff. Okay. So let's first start by looking at the most important picture. Now, let me ask you a question for those of you that are watching right now, and I'm curious to get your answer in the chat. Okay. So if you're if you're hearing this live, by the way, there's going to be a recorded version of this. But out of my own curiosity, if you attempted the 2021 September CFE, did you find it to be difficult? Did you find the case to be difficult, or any of the days? Did you feel like it was more difficult compared to previous years? I ask because of this data. Okay. Now, many of you know that the CFE was canceled in May for specific provinces and parts of the country. Okay. So what you would have expected is the entire wave of people would be substantially higher here in the September CFE, right? I understand certain people don't want to write the exam because of COVID. However, there is kind of, a constant uptake, and there is a constant flow of candidates going through the process. So in a nutshell, there should always be a slightly higher amount, because every year there's more and more people enrolling in the CPA designation and going into the process. So there should be always more candidates passing. Now, let me show you something that I think is kind of bizarre, especially in my world. First of all, the September CFE had the lowest number of individuals who passed at 5,912 in the last 5 years. Okay. Now, why? I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but a lot of it had to do with the way that it was organized, the cancellation of the May CFE. So certain people across the country wrote, and then certain people did not in terms of May versus, the September exam. But the other thing that I just want to point out here is if you take a look at the general pass rate the pass rate for the exam seems to be going down at approximately 1 percentage point per year. So it started off in 2018 at 77.6%, which is pretty high, right? It's almost 80%. Now in 2020, and by the way, 2021 has not been released yet, but I expect that it will actually be lower than 2020. So 2020 was 75.8. I expect 2021 to be less than 75%, okay? Because what's happening here is if you take a look at the total number of writers, the successful writers, if you look at Ontario, 2820 compared to 2864, right? Ontario being the biggest market for CPAs, right? For CPA candidates. Well, here's like, it's down 2%. And the May CFE was canceled in Ontario. Historically speaking, Ontario candidates outperformed other parts of the country and have had a substantially higher number of candidates passing each year. So if I was to show you this slide, I actually wish that I did this now, but I think you can trust me here. It was a number that was substantially higher, and it used to jump up a lot. Like it was like 7% up all the time. You know what I mean? So for it to go down 2% to me is kind of bizarre, okay? And then the other market, which by the way is the Quebec market, where it was also canceled for May, was also actually up, but unfortunately that market is pretty small, only about 1,200 candidates, and that's kind of where you end up in this result. Now, WSB, a lot of people chose to write the May exam, so as you can see, it's down 21%, right? Way less writers. And Atlantic, also down 14%. Okay, like it's not a lot if you think about it, but it is a lot if you think about the total number of people that are entering the profession. Now, the other thing that I will also say is I think if you look at the baby boomer generation, if you look at the total number of people actually leaving the profession, retiring, we need more CPAs. Okay, so what actually happens on a macro level, and if you're curious about this, by the way, you can pull up something called the CPA Compensation Survey. So CPA Canada does this really interesting survey every single year, and they basically look at the various like demographics of where CPAs are, what markets they work in, how much they make. Everyone's curious. How much money am I going to make as soon as I become a CPA? Well, if you're curious, CPA Compensation Survey will tell you that information. Now, what's curious about, at least for me, is just the number of people that are reaching the retirement age. So in the next 5 years, we will have a drastic number of people dropping off the profession, like completely exiting. Okay. And I understand you might have the odd person or two that might be interested in staying longer because they want to continue working longer, etc. I understand, but those are anecdotal examples, right? The average older individual will actually retire and will completely fall off the face of the earth at that point, and will no longer practice accounting. So for this number to be lower is actually kind of scary, because the CPA body is obviously not doing enough to attract, the right number of candidates to the profession. So anyway, it might be very difficult for you. And, I think, we might have a shortage in the future. So I think that's kind of the point. Anyway, and enough with that. So some of you here are, and I'm seeing this in the chat comments already, some of you here are here because you were unsuccessful on the exam. Okay, so let me break it down, and let me start by looking at day one first, because it's the first. And then I'm going to talk about other days together with all of you. Okay, so let's first talk about day one failures, and then let's talk about other days like day 2 and 3. Okay. And by the way, if you were unsuccessful on all 3 days, that is okay as well. That is totally okay. It's just you need to be able to strategize and understand why. So that's why we're here. Anyway, so the confusing part about day one is that you don't really get any information whatsoever to substantiate, to explain, to suggest how you can do better. It's just basically no information whatsoever. And that's a very frustrating part of the process. That has been frustrating for a lot of candidates actually up until this point for the last several years. The further complication with day one is there is only a specific number of times that you can do the same case from a Capstone 1 perspective. So there's like a very, very limited number of attempts before you have to actually, basically repeat the case information from Capstone 1. So that creates and throws a curveball that people don't really like because, yeah, you technically get three attempts, but really the third attempt is you have to relearn the whole new case, and it's complicated. It's very complicated. So let me explain day one failures in a very, very layman kind of a way, okay? Just so it's extremely easy to understand. Day one is not like, and you may have seen this, day one is not like days 2 and 3, okay? Day one is a completely different, isolated exam that is lumped together with day 2 and 3, and it is completely not connected at all, okay? Like literally, these could be two separate exams, day 1 versus day 2 and 3. For some reason, they're lumped in together. Day 1 focuses more on the writing, the enabling competencies. Days 2 and 3 is more the actual technical competencies, okay? And that's really what makes it very, very confusing. And I would say if you fail day 1, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It means that you haven't followed the appropriate layout that you should have followed in order to be successful on the day 1 portion. So the layout is very specific. Like you have to answer a question within a particular layout in order for you to be successful on this portion. So the way for you to improve next year, and by the way, it happens all the time. Like it's really not a big deal. Again, if you're unsuccessful, you just have to kind of think about it as more of a speed bump, right? Like you're just slowing down a little bit, but you can keep going again, right? Like it's really not a big deal. And the way for you to address and the way for you to move forward from here is, in my opinion, you should watch some of our resources on day 1. So we have a lot of day 1 resources that are specific, and there's actually one specific class that focuses on the day 1 process. And it was free for anyone who actually enrolled with us last year. So you're welcome to actually go back and watch those resources if you're, for example, an experienced writer. But consider this: if you only fail day 1 and pass day 2 and 3, it's actually kind of good because you can now focus on a very small part of the exam and become an expert in this space. It's actually kind of harder to pass day 2 and 3 in the future because there's so much more involved, okay? So if you passed only, day 2 and 3 but failed day 1, it's actually it's not as bad as you think, okay? It's not as bad as you think because, again, there's a very strategic way of writing, and the way for you to actually kind of do this is for you to relearn the approach. Watch some of our CFE Day 1 resources, which, by the way, are built specifically by a CFE Day 1 marker that we have within the program. And then try to focus on creating a better response for your Day 1 cases. Now, another trick that I'll teach you that I think is kind of interesting, that the Day 2, again, not Day 1, the Day 2 PM role, the actual role part often looks very similar to the Day 1 exam as well, okay? So the PM role specifically looks very similar. So if you're looking for additional practice cases, I find those are, really good examples of things that you can, immediately add to the mix to make it much easier on yourself here, okay? So I would say, definitely not something that you want to see. But yeah, it is what it is. The other thing that I'll say here, and I see I'm missing a number here, If you take a look at the Board of Evaluators like reports from 2015 onwards, there was a very big change that happened in 2018 specifically, which flipped the idea of the situational analysis. So prior to 2018, the situational analysis was a separate portion of the actual case that you were writing and separate portion of your answer. After 2018, they've actually flipped the situational analysis, and now the marks are just integrated directly into all of the separate AOs. So that specific kind of flip is what really created a lot of problems for different candidates, and most importantly caused a lot of issues. Okay, it caused a lot of issues for candidates because that's basically the biggest factor that has been changed, dramatically here. Okay, and I'm getting, by the way, a very interesting question here specifically about day one in the chat here. It says, do you mean PM role could be easier compared to the assurance role? Historically speaking, Kelly, the PM role has actually had a lower pass rate compared to the assurance role. So if you were to go back and look at the pass rates of individual sections, and I do this in some of my other classes, Kelly. So if you take a look at some of my other classes, specifically that focus on pass rates and case writing, you will see that I sometimes analyze every one of the electives and I show real data, and you can actually see that assurance typically has a slightly, very marginal, but slightly higher pass rate compared to PM. And historically, if you were to map out all the years, PM actually has the lowest pass rate. And the reason why PM has the lowest pass rate, and I could talk just a little bit about this while we're on the subject. The reason why, and this, by the way, this is now like a day two thing. And I mean, this is more of like my own kind of I guess like hypothesis. The reason I think why the PM role has a lower pass rate, slightly higher, slightly lower pass rate, is because it's generally selected by candidates as a catch-all. So it's like someone doesn't want to do assurance, they don't really like tax, and they think finance is too difficult, so they end up with PM. It's like a catch-all. It's like kind of like a final, I guess like a final decision, or like a last choice kind of a thing for a lot of candidates, especially if you don't want the public accounting route. I find PM becomes this natural, like, okay, yeah, I guess I'll just do PM. It's probably easier. And it's not. Funny enough, it's actually the lowest pass rate, historically speaking, for, most of the years very consistently. And I think it's because of that. Like anecdotally, I obviously can't tell you the exact reason why, because I can't poll 5,000 people. But just from what I've seen, it kind of in my own, in my world of being in the CFE world for the last, I don't know how many years, at least since, 2015, anecdotally, I can tell you that a lot of candidates pick PM because it seems easy, or it's just a catch-all. So anyway, cool. So just to summarize, day one, if you just failed day one, it's okay. We have really good resources. We have a CFE day one marker in the program. And if you are looking specifically for CFE day one resources, please reach out and I will point you into the direction of, number one, where the course is that you should watch. And number two, I'll set you up with a marker. So you have, kind of that one-on-one and hand holding and assistance on how to specifically address, okay, and how to specifically move forward, okay, because I think that that's very important. Now, for those of you that failed day 2 and 3, it's usually on one of the 4 levels, and sometimes, unfortunately, it's a combination of all 4 levels, okay? So let me say this. A lot of you are probably going to ask the question of, should I get an appeal? Should I get a par? And a lot of people look at the appeal and par very much like kind of playing the lottery. They see the chance, there's a 1% chance that I might be successful. And it's so amazing. I should do it for the 1%. But what if, right? The what if. So the what if, by the way, is a horrible thing because it gets people to be very excited And in reality, it's generally a bad idea. But I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail like in a second. Let me first explain the 4 levels in a very simple way. And, let me just kind of walk through what these levels mean. So if you're looking at these levels, so you have an idea of what I'm even talking about, okay? So first and foremost, level 1 is an average. Basically, it's called sufficiency. So sufficiency is an average of all of your different AOs. And the idea is it's kind of your performance across the whole exam. If you were to, compare every single AO, did you attempt all issues? And did you score better or worse than average on these issues? That's basically level 1. Okay, so if you are seeing a level 1 fail, what that means is you're consistently a little bit below average across all issues. That's one possibility. The second possibility is on level 1, it means that you may have missed certain assessment opportunities, because when you're calculating average, the easiest way to make your average go down within a sequence of numbers is to have a 0 in one of the numbers. So I find sometimes when people score level 1 fails, that generally means that it's either they're consistently lower or they've missed a couple of AOs. Now, by missing a couple of AOs, I don't mean necessarily leaving them blank. So there's a misconception out there that you have to leave an AO blank. And no, you can technically miss an AO just by writing very little about it or completely getting it wrong, that it's not even counting as like an attempt, okay? Like what I mean is an NA or an NC. Because an NC also has 0, marks, not competent, right? Would still be measured, the same way. The only reason in the marking guide that, you're probably wondering, why is there an NA and an NC? The only reason why, why there's 2 zeros basically, right? 0 point scores. The only reason is the CPA body wants to determine who has actually addressed something and not addressed something. So, but, irrespective of whether you've addressed and attempted something, but it's not a very good attempt and it lands you in the NC bucket, it still means that you haven't gotten where you should be, okay? Anyway, so both NA and NC will drag down your level 1 and eventually will kind of, hurt you, okay? And if you're seeing a specific, sufficiency score of like 1 versus 9 versus 5 and whatever, and let's say that you're very scared because you got a sufficiency of like 4, okay? Let me explain a little bit about sufficiency to you, because I think that's another secret, or not a secret, just something that you kind of have to think about. The distribution of candidates and the way that people write is extremely tight, okay? No one is a dummy going through this process. So what you end up getting is mathematically what's known as a tight distribution, which means everyone's very, very close, okay? Like if you're like off by an AO and a half, another could be off by an AO in like a little bit, like basically RC versus a C. What I'm saying is often when you see a sufficiency of like 3 and then you see a sufficiency of 6, it actually could be very tight. I mean, it sounds really bad if you feel 6 or 7 sounds bad, but in my experience, like a 7 and like a 4 is actually pretty close in terms of actual mark distribution. There is a big difference, however, between like a 1 and like a 10, okay? So on the outer spectrum, a sufficiency of 1 is extremely close to passing. A sufficiency of 10, unfortunately, is pretty far away. But anything kind of in the middle, please don't get discouraged, because it's actually kind of tight, okay? It's a very, very tight, narrow distribution, okay? So anyway. So then, by the way, any questions on that, like feel free to jot them in the chat. I know it's pretty quiet here today. Normally I get a lot of questions kind of right up until this point. As soon as I say something like this, I usually get a flood of questions, or people are trying to ask about things that they've never really understood before. Anyway, in the meanwhile, let me explain levels 2, 3, and 4. Now, depth and breadth are actually kind of misleading because depth is referring to, at say level 2, predominantly how many times you've scored a C in FR or MA, okay, compared to like an RC. So it's like a minimum number of Cs. In most cases, it's about 4 to 5 Cs that you need across the whole exam in order for you to score depth, okay, in either FR or MA. And it's kind of the same idea for your role, okay? If you picked assurance or PM or finance or tax, etc., you need a minimum number of Cs, okay? Now, the tricky part with depth is it's always a bit of a rolling, moving target because it's heavily based off of the performance of other candidates. The challenge that I find with depth is this is the area where if people score a little bit better, then the target moves, the benchmark moves, and that's what makes it very difficult, okay? It's very, very difficult because it might move a little bit based on actual performance of other candidates, okay? So, but there is one consistent factor, okay, which is something that you should kind of look at. So generally speaking, your elective role, level 3, your elective role is usually done better by most candidates compared to FR or MA. So I find the role always has a higher pass rate than FR or MA. So what that means, so if you were to be unsuccessful on depth in level 3, it generally means that it's probably not a good candidate for an appeal because the performance is so high. And same goes for level 2, especially if you are unsuccessful in both FR or MA, it generally means that you're kind of really further back. So I'll kind of talk more about this in a second. And I'm getting a lot of questions about sufficiencies and appeals. I will cover that on my next slide. So just give me a sec. I just want to be able to explain this a little bit more with level 4. And then we're going to talk about actual like concrete examples here. Okay. So level 4, by the way, is your breadth. So it's like the at least, so it's a very minimal standard. It's pretty simple compared to the other levels. It's not easy. It's just simple to understand. We're looking for 1 C in general. Sometimes people say it's 1 RC. Now, I find it varies based on actual performance of candidates on the exam. So you can't say that it's exactly going to be an RC because sometimes, let's say the average candidate does really well. Well, then that's what breadth would be for other people, okay? So sometimes I kind of say that it's a C. It could be also an RC. It really depends on what you see. Anyway, so let me actually now tackle some of the appeal questions, okay? This is, by the way, a very sensitive part of the discussion. There's going to be a lot of opinions. I'll tell you the official CPA, also, I guess, program, and I'll tell you the official CPA kind of guidance, and then I'll also tell you what I think, okay? So first of all, sufficiency is how close or far you are compared to other people, right? So first decile to 10th decile. If you're like in the first decile, then you're very close to passing. If you're in the 10th decile, it means that you have a number of different scores that are substantially lower than other candidates, okay? Now, the question is, I often get this question. I scored 2nd decile. Should I appeal? And the answer is no. The chances of winnings with a 2nd decile or higher, like 2 to 10, is basically 0, okay? If you look at the CPA stats, it's unfortunately, very, very, very low. Same goes for failing only on level 2 or level 3. And that's because depth is very competitive. Okay? Again, as I mentioned, you need under level 2 either FR or MA, and under your role, you need the pass rate is generally very high compared to FR or MA. So with relative marking, unfortunately, it generally means if you failed level 2 or 3, you probably should not request an appeal. Okay? In my entire history, in 10 years of me doing this, I think it's like been 9 or 10 years of me doing this, I've only seen 2 successful appeal attempts. Both of them were with a first decile level 1 fail. Both were the exact same. First decile level 1 fail. Okay? And the reason for that is we could be off by like 1 AO. And depending on kind of where you're at, even at that point, by the way, I think the exact CPA guidance is that you should request an appeal for levels 1 and 2, by the way. For deciles 1 and 2. The official CPA literature says that you should request an appeal for deciles 1 and 2. I think it's a waste of money for 2, but I agree with the first based on the data that they release. And then the pass rate, I guess, or the success rate is something like, I believe it's like 2 or 3%, even with the first decile. So again, it's not great. It's not in your favor at all. I also don't recommend to appeal day 1, okay? Generally speaking, you probably should not, do this because day 1 is so vague that if you were already not meeting, it's so subjective in the way that it's marked that I don't really recommend it. Okay. So again, as I mentioned, basically, if you're failing only on level 2 or 3, and there's someone asking this question, if level 1 is a pass, level 3 is a fail, should I appeal? Again, I wish I could tell you otherwise, but I would not recommend to appeal a level 2 or level 3 fail. The only result that I would recommend for you to appeal is a level 1 fail with a decile 1 fail. Okay, that is the only one that I would suggest. And it's just based on data and the way that the pass rates work. And what I will say, again, I will, it is what it is. But appeals and PARs are a great revenue and profit maximization opportunity for the CPA bodies. Candidates are very vulnerable at the time that they make these decisions to request the appeals. And I don't agree unless the math supports it. And the math, in my opinion, from the data that I've seen, supports only a level 1 decile 1 appeal. And even in that point, in that case, like I think like I should tell you it's not in your favor. Okay, like it's not like it's a 50%. Appeal rate. It's not even close. I think it's 3% for a level 1 decile 1. Okay. Now a PAR is a whole different thing. So on Tuesday we have a whole session explaining the next steps, and I highly recommend actually for you to check out the Tuesday session because we're going to talk a lot about PARs and whether you should and whether you should approach or not. So yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that, like in a second. So just, feel free to join us on the Tuesday session and I'll talk, more about PARs, but in general, I actually do not recommend PARs as well because a PAR is, you're never going to remember exactly what you wrote. B, you don't get to see your actual question paper in the PAR. You only see excerpts that support like RC or C or whatever it might be. So you don't really have enough information to work with. Like it's not like it's full disclosure about how your case is marked. It's actually not like that at all. So I don't like the PAR and I don't think the appeal is worth it. So the most important thing that you can have here is you got to go back and you got to enter the case writing mode again, and you got to just go into the process, from scratch. By the way, I'm seeing a typo here on point number 4. It says 2020 CFE. Yeah, sorry, that's a typo, but all of the other information is consistent here. Okay. So yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of one of the challenges that I often face whenever we're doing anything like this. It becomes a very difficult part of the process, right? So I have to be kind of the messenger, and one of the challenges that I often find is it's tough being the messenger because people are so excited for the appeal process. And, I see a lot of candidates that see it as an incredible opportunity. And unfortunately, it's not quite, it doesn't quite work the way that, you think it works. And that's kind of the difficult part about, this whole process. Okay. So anyway, for those of you, by the way, that are watching and are looking for a day one, webinar, here's one I'll attach to the specific chat here. However, there's a number of other ones that you should watch. So if you do have access to the program, there's just a whole bunch of them under the whole CFE category. So if you look at here, this is the whole category, and I just pasted the links directly in there. Okay. And just to answer the other question, there was a question here, just to clarify, I got level 7. Does it mean I got less C's or RC's? Generally speaking, with a decile of 7, it means that you generally are not scoring C's. So it means that the average response is consistently stuck. Okay, it's like stuck behind C, so it's always hitting an RC, but it is not hitting a C. So you are consistently having issues hitting C's across various different competency areas. So unfortunately, that's what that means. So you're kind of stuck behind the C. Okay, perfect. All right, how do you study again? I know this is not what you want to hear. However, if you are unsuccessful, it's very important actually that you get back into the process, and like, that's why we're all here. Okay. I would much rather have, a nice email from you if you are a student in the program that has, and by the way, we get like hundreds of these emails every single year. And honestly, I kind of ignore the ones that are friendly and, oh, thanks, I've passed. Great, Mike. Okay, bye. I don't care anymore. Now it's kind of, I'm always interested in the more difficult cases, in the extreme cases. And as an educator, that's sort of what makes me interested in the process. And I like to work with the extreme cases of, where people are struggling, because often it's like a puzzle piece. You're trying to understand what is someone writing that is causing them to land in that kind of a situation, or maybe sometimes not writing. And, are they too slow? Or do they not know they're technical? Do they not have the strategy when it comes down to time management? Like, what is it, right? Like, what's basically going wrong? So I guess as an educator, that's what makes me much more interested. But let's talk about some of the, the actual logistics. Do you need to take time off again? That's a very important decision to make. So I would say, I'll say that the caveat around this is that it's highly dependent on specifically what kind of an employer relationship, you have. So I would say it's very important to take time off if you're writing day 2 and 3. It's generally not really required for day 1. So in my experience, if you just fail day 1 alone, you don't really need to take a lot of time off, like maybe like a day or 2 before the exam, just to unwind and like relax. But other than that, like, not really. But for day 2 and 3, yeah, I would say I would suggest 2 weeks before. So you can practice doing the case writing. You can get into the groove of writing a professional exam. I think maybe, a week minimum, like really, really minimum. And 2 weeks is kind of my suggestion. But if, you're working somewhere and you don't have the vacation time and you can't take time off and you have a bad boss, or, we've all had those before. So try at least a week, okay? Just so you can kind of at least get a breather before you write such a complicated, difficult exam. Okay? So, and the PrepFormula pass, guarantee. So here's something that's very important, very, very important. So my suggestion, first of all, if you are unsuccessful, you can repeat the program. If you have the Prep Plus version of the program, all you simply have to do is email your results to the support at PrepFormula email, and we will do anything possible to help you pass without additional costs. Okay. So you can, repeat the credits. You can not repeat the credits, but you can continue using your credits from last year. And, we're going to do whatever it takes to actually help you at this point to keep you going. All right. So that's something that, I think is very important. Okay. So, and I'm getting a very interesting question here. So let me tackle the question, and then I'll talk about, the CFE overview, some more planning notes, etc. So the question reads, I had 4 FR and MA AOs unaddressed, but I passed level 3 and 4 and failed level 1 and 2. Could you explain the impact of the unaddressed AOs? What do I do on a case when I can't figure out an AO? Really good question. So if you have, by the way, level 2 is measuring FR or MA. So if you have unaddressed AOs, that means that you failed level 2 because you don't address them, correct? So the level 2 here makes sense. Passing level 3 also makes sense because it means that you understand your role. Passing level 4 also makes sense because level 4 looks at other competency areas other than FR, MA, or your role. So the result makes sense. Now, failing level 1 also makes sense because you are scoring a 0 on 4 different AOs. And generally speaking, I'm seeing something here. I've heard people say that just writing a sentence is better than not writing anything at all. Okay, by the way, I kind of agree, but I kind of don't. Let me explain it like this. So that's a really, really good question. And by the way, for those of you that are currently watching, this is very important. So please listen to what I'm about to say. And if you take away one thing from what I'm going to say this entire session, it's what I'm about to say now about this response, okay? Because the CFE is designed in such a way that there's going to be at least 1 or 2 curveballs and topics that you are not aware of, okay? So the choice is, do you address them or do you not? So what do you do on a case when you can't figure out NAO? That's probably like the most golden thing that I can tell you right now, okay? And the way that I do it, the way that I suggest, is to go back to first principles, okay? So if you can't figure something out and you're looking at something and you're saying, what in the world am I looking at? Like, what kind of a transaction is this? I don't even understand what I'm looking at. Never mind, how do I solve this? Okay. The trick is first principles. So what that means is go back to section 1000 in the handbook and try to, for example, for FR, try to look at the situation in the most basic of concept, of context. So is this an asset? Is it a liability? Is it equity? Is it an expense? Okay. And try to go through and isolate pieces because you can get an RC, strictly by using first principles, because first principles are the cornerstone of financial reporting. So on a high level perspective, how do people within the accounting world later on in life, okay, let's say that you're all really successful and you get into standard setting one day, okay, you work at CPA Canada or ASB or these, like, how do people set standards? Well, they go back to Section 1000. So that's why Section 1000 is always important, or first, like, principles, the basic definition of an asset. You see, if something doesn't fit right, it doesn't fit right because the type of treatment that is, for example, used in a section, like, why do standards change? They change because it says that it's supposed to be like an expense, but it's really treated more like a liability. You know what I mean? So if you go back to first principles and try to kind of rationalize your way through an FR that you don't really know, like an FRAO that you don't really know, then you have the possibility of getting an RC. And it's way better than scoring an NC. Okay? So if you don't quite understand, it's always better to get an RC than an NC. So first principles is where you're going to go. Same goes for MA. You don't understand MA. I don't know what I'm looking at. Well, there's no first principles, so it's not like something that you can open up in the act to, what is definition of an asset. So my way of looking at this is twofold. MA always has either a qualitative or a quantitative perspective. Go back to the basics. So if it's qualitative, it'll be kind of like a pro and con, right? So set up pros and cons. At least give me the qualitative in pros and cons, okay? So that's a simple version for MA. The other alternative, let's say it's numbers. The way that I like to look at everything in life is you look at cash inflows versus cash outflows, okay? Cash inflows versus cash outflows. If you were to line up that somehow based on information in the MA, then you'll kind of get the basics of whatever this is. So sometimes people don't really know what kind of quant to use, like what they're reading. Go back, to the basics, okay? So that's something, yeah. Anyway. One last question that I'm getting here. Does your CFE prep program run simultaneously with Capstone 2? And the answer is no. Our CFE program actually, and here, let me show you. And by the way, you've all already kind of seen this. So, this is the CFE kind of, and we've talked about the rules here too. So let me actually kind of jump. Actually, sorry, there's a couple more things that, that I want to talk about. But I will say we actually start way earlier before Capstone 2, because by the time that Capstone 2 hits, you don't have time for anything. So we start, like, today is the official start date of the program. Okay, so my suggestion is to address the problems that you have today, okay, or this week or this month or next month before you're in Capstone 2. Because if you're in Capstone 2 and you're starting to look at our resources, it's kind of, you're too far gone, okay? Like, at that point, it's stressful. So why not address what's going wrong today and look at what's, broken, right? So we start now. We start in December, slowly, on a weekend, in a one-on-one call to understand what's going wrong, dig deep, and then address it, figure out how to address it, okay? And then before you know it, you'll be ready for Capstone 2. So yeah, I don't, hopefully that answers your question. Okay, one other thing that I want to share here. Actually, there's a couple of things that I still have for today that I want you all to know, okay? Like, it kind of bothers me sometimes because I want to tell people about this. And as you can see, I'm a very, I like what I do. I don't have to do CFE prep. I have a day job, but I really like doing this. And it's just something that's in me that I want to be able to explain the rules to all this. So here's another rule of something that you should know about this game that you're playing. So the day 2 marks are weighted a little more differently compared to the day 3 marks. So what you might notice, and here's how you should always look at your own cases. If you are looking at your own cases and you're marking like a day 2 case, treat it as a mark out of 6. So something like competent would be 6 marks. Something like reaching would be 3 marks. Anything below like an RC, aka NC or NA would be a 0. Okay. Now the same thing goes for a day 3 case. The shorter cases, that's out of 4. So 2 marks for reaching, 4 marks for competent, or by the way, competent with this, with distinction. Yeah, it doesn't really work, but then 0 again below RC. Okay. But the important thing is that you understand that there's going to be this kind of level of difference and level of depth also expected. So obviously, naturally, you expected are to write more. So let me give you a concrete example of what I mean here. So for example, let's say that you have a FR opportunity that shows up on day 2, of course, in the common area. And it's something that you have to solve. And it's like something really weird on some bizarre revenue recognition, treatment under IFRS with, I don't know, whatever. Okay. You pick. Okay. And it's not the standard rev rec like IFRS 15. It's something like appendix, related. Okay. It's like one of the obscure examples. So you're expected on a day 2 to provide the adjusting journal entry. You're not expected to do that, not expected on a day 3. So that's the big difference, okay? So for example, that's why one of them has 6 marks, one of them has 4. The other thing is, and by the way, I'm getting some questions here, so I'll just pile them up because I'm almost done and I wanted to leave some time for questions anyway. The other thing that I should always say also is if you are writing your exams using a piece of paper and you are, relying on writing something down on paper, I want to tell you that it's generally a bad practice to use a piece of paper because paper will not be marked by your case marker. I will never actually see the piece of paper that you're, scribbling on. I like to suggest for you to do all your planning in a Word document directly in the question paper and to get started as soon as possible. And we teach this method called RODAC, which basically teaches you how to go through each individual step and how to, read the case once, extract all the information, organize using this computer outline, which basically is like a skeleton for the rest of your response. And then divide everything into different topics. So as you're reading, like each paragraph becomes, okay, this is FR, that's assurance, that's MA, etc. Okay, so as you're basically reading, you should be trying to understand how they're trying to test you. And then also come up with the right format on how to answer, like a pro and con. Okay, cool. Like they're asking me about, the qualitative of MA. Okay, cool. I'll use pro and con. And then I should probably aim for about 4 points each. You know what I mean? Or whatever the number is, and we can teach you the number. But the point is, you should always kind of predict as you're, reading. The most important thing for you to realize, and this is all a game. This is not real life. It's not, there's no promotion at the end of this exam. This is a standardized exam where every single sentence is carefully written to extract the right emotion and the right trigger from you. If you don't see the trigger, there's something wrong with the way that you're A, approaching, B, reading, C, keeping track of your timeline, etc. Okay, everything here is standardized. So you need a standardized approach for how you read, hence why we teach RODAC. And by the way, like this is kind of like how I would do it on a piece of paper, except I move that right into the computer. So you can actually do the same thing on a computer and then fill in the blanks instead of actually doing this on a piece of paper. Okay, so part 2 of 2 is going to focus on proper debriefing and how you do this. So I'm actually going to reserve this specific slide and more on this for part 2 of 2. So by the way, I should tell you, the second part of this is taught by a very experienced person. They used to be in charge of the whole EY UFI program for like a decade, okay? So his name is Towser Dalal. He teaches in our program, And he's kind of an older, guy that is also, I would say, like me, obsessed with the process of the CFE and is super interested in, the game part of this. So he's teaching a session at, Tuesday, 8 o'clock. The session is free, by the way, just like this session. And it will walk through the basics of proper debriefing. So everything that you need to know as part of proper debriefing. Okay. So there's a little bit of a cheat sheet here, but I actually don't want to conflict with what he's going to say. So for now, I'll kind of skip it. Okay. Last but not least, be very careful with who you get advice from in this industry, because unless you have National Marketing Center experience, a CPA facilitator cannot be a marker cannot be a facilitator. So for example, I would have a contractual restriction from a facilitator that I can't mark, and vice versa. So be careful with where you get information from. Anyway, okay, so what's your kind of game plan? So my suggestion for any of you that are doing the exam starting now, treat this like this, okay? Let's from now on start now, okay? December, even January, okay? Let's say you're like, hey, you know what? I don't want to do anything in December. I just want to drink some eggnog, okay? Decorate my tree or whatever. You don't want to do anything right now. I understand. Okay, that's cool. So starting January, my suggestion, 1 case per week. So make your entire week about 1 case. I want you to obsess over this 1 case. So Monday, you write the case after work, okay? Usually, 90-minute case, like a day 3, okay? Tuesday, you debrief the case, and then you attend our class, okay? Wednesday, you reattempt the same case again. So get into the habit of writing the same case multiple times, or at least writing sections of that case multiple times, because that's just good practice. And then Thursday, you debrief the case again, and then Friday to Sunday, you're off. Now, if you have a very hectic job and you have a very hectic employer that you don't like, and that's cool. Again, that happens a lot early on in your career. That's why you're all here. You all want to become CPAs so you can escape your cruel and terrible employers, and you want to move up in the world and you want to do amazing things. I understand. I was in your shoes before. I kind of get it. So if you have a more demanding job, then you can do the same thing on a Friday night to a Sunday schedule. So just kind of flip it. But my suggestion is try to do 1 case per week. Now, worst case, do 1 case every 2 weeks. So maybe 1 week on, 1 week off. Okay? Anyway. And the plan of attack. So we're starting now, not February or June. 1 case per week. We also have a 5 session program called CFE Live. We're already starting with coaching and these classes. And that's pretty much it, what you're going to find. So again, the PrepFormula program is a combination of recorded classes, one-on-one help, a lot of practice questions, so about 50 practice questions, 50. There is a T2202 that's provided for the course fees, as well. And if you have any questions or you generally have any, are looking for some support, the purpose of the program is just to help you get through during the first attempt, basically. Okay. So here's some more information about what we do. Please note that our pass guarantee applies to the Prep Plus version. And, we've basically began the course as of today. Okay. So, so let me see if there's any questions. So I'd be happy to help answer any questions that you might have. So let's start the Q&A period. And let's see where you're all at. Okay. So does anyone have any questions? By the way, before I forget, please sign up for the second session Tuesday at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. You can also email me. Let's say you don't want to say anything in the chat and you don't want to, share your personal information with other people within the chat, I understand. You can also email me. So here's my email address, mike.katzman@prepformula.com. You're always welcome to contact me for any questions that you may have. And yeah, I mean, let's kind of see if there's any questions at all here. So someone's saying, could you provide me the link for the debrief? Okay. Do you mind telling me what kind of a link you mean? Like the debrief, you mean the program that is coming up on Tuesday? Like, is that sort of what your question is? The Tuesday program, or do you mean debrief being like Rodak? So what specifically are you talking about? Just so I know. By the way, here is the Tuesday class. And another question that I'm getting here is it better to write May or September? May or September? In my opinion, it's always better to write May. The reason why it's better to write May is there's less writers and there's less firm writers. So generally speaking, historically, the strongest candidates in the process are the ones that have professional resources, like consultants, like me. Okay, I'm a consultant. So where do we make all our money as consultants? It's working for firms. Firms pay top dollar to get consultants to help their students to pass the CFE at any cost. Why do they do this? Because they see this as a recruiting opportunity. Because they say, hey, you know what? Our firm had a 97% pass rate. So you should come join us because you're also going to pass. And meanwhile, these firms basically make you work horrible hours. And anyway, I don't want to get into firm life, but they see it as a recruiting opportunity to get, different candidates to join. So to answer your question, it's always better to write May because of busy season. You're going to get a lot less firm candidates and a lot more of them in September. Okay. And the ones in September have all gone and have all had a lot of, fancy consultants that join the firm, help them, pass and study better. Okay. So just to tell you, I think the competition's tougher. So that's kind of my own, opinion. I don't know I don't have any data really. And then some of the people are saying, yeah, let's hope the May CFE doesn't get canceled. I am like 99% sure that it will not get canceled in 2022. I know a lot of people have said this about 21, but I am pretty sure that it won't get canceled. But we're going to see that right now. Okay. Anyone have any other questions? Anything at all? I mean, let's get started. I know it's December, so it's kind of feels weird to get started with, CFE prep right now, but I can tell you, now is actually a really good time to get started because it's not busy and no one else is thinking about this. So from now on, we're going to have a full roster of classes. You're going to get more information about this soon, and we're officially starting the program. So you're going to start getting emails about live classes. You're going to start, seeing communication about what cases to write. And we're basically starting the process at the moment, like as we speak. And someone saying, any study plan for a candidate who's sitting for the May 2022 CFE for the first time? Do you have one? Yes, absolutely. So if you're already a student in the program, we already have a schedule that's available. So all you have to do is you have to reach out to your mentor to ask for the schedule for the 22 CFE in May. So we already have one available. It's just available directly from your mentor. Okay. Amazing. Everyone doing okay? Everyone's, is everyone just tired because it's a Sunday? Oh boy. Anyway, okay, so I'm gonna maybe possibly disconnect here, and if anyone has any other questions, you are all welcome to email me. The email is available right now, like on your screen here. And yeah, I'm excited to get the process started again. Again, if the result that you received is not the one that you wanted, let's keep trying. Let's keep doing this, and let's move it a step further. As someone saying, do you have technical, review in your program, or is it just case writing? We have more technical review sessions than case writing. So we have a substantially higher percentage of technical, review. In fact, you can see all the categories here. So Miriam, we actually have more categories that relate to FR, MA, finance, tax, etc., than any other category or, anything like that. So yeah, absolutely. Tons of technical review with case application. Julo, I'm very strong with technicals, but not time management. I've been unable to pass day 2 where I pass all level 4. So the question is, do you provide customized one-on-one coaching for day 2? Yeah, absolutely. So again, the program is already customized, okay? So the program is already one-on-one based. So as soon as you join, we will help you with whatever's broken, which in your case is CFE day 2. So we're very happy to help you specifically with the CFE day 2. So yeah, definitely very, very happy to, very, very happy to help here. So yeah, can definitely help with one-on-one coaching for day 2 as part of the program. Okay, wonderful. All right. Okay, folks. So yeah, again, if you have any other questions, please, reach out. In the meanwhile, if you need to reach me, here's my email address on your screen. Again, we'll see you all at the session number 2, Tuesday, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules. I really appreciate it. Really, really appreciate it. And, happy to continue running these classes. All right. Okay. Thank you.